Average Ontario Anglers, and I'm joined, as will continue to be the case, with Jesse.
I'm here.
This is our episode 0, kind of a pilot intro to our upcoming podcast. It has the same title as where you found us everywhere else, Average Ontario Anglers. And we're excited to have this kind of be our next phase that we're introducing as for content. It's kind of a podcast by two average anglers with hopefully above average content. So we have some questions that we wanted to answer that we had posted on Instagram, which will be a continuing feature on the podcast where you can pose a question. There's always a possibility we might address it in an upcoming episode, or we might respond to you online, whatever's best. And we know what's going on behind the scenes more than you will, but we'll make sure you get a response either way.
So I'm just going to look at some of these questions here that we posted on a question and answer on our stories on Instagram. And we're going to start off with a question Parker Robbins sent us. And his question was, well, it wasn't a question. He said, it would be cool to hear y'all's story, how you got into fishing and when you started doing content. So why don't you start with that one, Andrew?
Well, I have home videos of me as a little kid pretending to fish because I couldn't be trusted with open hooks at like 6 years old. So I'd be hanging a crooked stick down into the river at my cottage, at the family cottage. And I, from the get-go, have always liked fishing. And then once Jesse and I became good friends, that's what we really bonded over. And he pulled me a lot deeper into the whole angling area. So
I take full responsibility.
I'm glad he did. I don't know about anyone else in my life, but yeah, it's been good doing that. And then with our contents, I know Jesse started that a while ago. How many years ago was that you started AOA?
Well, originally I had started Instagram doing power tool reviews, and it was pretty good. Like it did good with it. We're not doing that anymore, but I kept deciding like I want to do something that I actually am super passionate about. And then I was like, why don't we do a fishing Instagram account and see what happens? And then a lot of hard work, a lot of posting, and 3 years later we're one of the bigger non-professional accounts in Ontario. So pretty happy with that. It's been amazing, and Andrew now has stepped up and is making a lot of content himself, and it's been really fun. Like, we have a fun time making content. We're not out there with like legit, super high-end drones and stuff, but I think we do some pretty good stuff.
Not yet.
Yeah.
There's always the hope. But Jesse and I, we've been fishing together for, almost 2 decades.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
And
a long time.
Seems longer than it is. But I remember growing up and we'd be filming on this little crappy digital camera, 3.2 megapixel Sony camera. And it was great because if we didn't like the video, we delete it, but we liked them all.
That was back when cameras had AA batteries in them, and we would just burn through batteries like
and the
crazy.
Big compact discs. Like, listen up, kids, we're old.
Yeah.
So we'd be, playing videos, and we'd rewatch the videos and mail them to each other on CDs after we put them on the computer.
Yep.
We were weird, but we always kind of liked listening to ourselves because we found ourselves hilarious. And we've been joking about having a podcast
for years.
When we first kind of heard of them, like, I listened to myself on a podcast. And recently my wife was actually, hey, you should do a podcast. And I was like, yeah, I really want to. Jesse brought it up again then just a couple weeks after that, and he's like, hey, what about a podcast? I was like, absolutely, I've wanted to do one for years. You've joked about it. Yeah. So I'm really excited. I know we both are excited about finally having like a podcast outlet to try and see if people also want to listen to us besides just ourselves.
Because there's a lot of podcasts out there. I mean, there's probably millions of podcasts, but in the fishing world, there are some really good podcasts that we've been listening to. There's a lot of like local guys and girls doing podcasts in Ontario, but I feel like there's a niche that has to be filled that we can fill, of just being average anglers. Like, we don't own bass boats, we don't have all the bells and whistles. We're just like everyone else. Most people, like 95% of people, we're relatable. We're kind of goofy looking.
One more than others.
Yeah, it's me. Anyway, so back on track. There's another question from Brandon Kwan. When and what fish made you fall in love with fishing? I'll start this time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I grew up trout fishing with my dad and my grandpa. Little trout streams, brown trout, brook trout, little rainbows, stuff like that. And that's pretty much what I did. In my early teens, my dad started taking me bass fishing for largemouth, shallow, weedy, rivers and lakes. And I honestly feel like I love trout fishing, love it to death. Been doing it for years, but bass fishing for me, catching, you know, my first largemouth bass on a topwater or my first bass on a lure, because like my dad didn't really use lures. Like he used like a jitterbug and that's about it. But reading, you know, Field and Stream and Outdoor Canada and all those old fishing books, because we didn't have YouTube back then, and seeing these guys fish like, you know, a purple plastic worm, and then I went out and actually caught a fish on it. It just blew my mind. I was like 12, 13 years old. It blew my mind that a fish would eat that. And then I just became obsessed with trying new techniques and trying different things. So I'd have to say it was the largemouth bass myself.
For me, it's definitely either smallmouth bass or rock bass. My family, our annual vacation that we do was either camping in Algonquin Park or at our family cottage. Both areas there was, you know, pretty decent bass fishing where we were camping or whatnot, where we were staying. And as a kid, like, my dad wasn't an avid fisherman like myself. Like, if he's camping, he'll do some fishing, but he's not going to really make a special day trip out to do something, which is what Jesse and I pretty much do with any day off. But when I first started catching smallmouth and I'd catch a quarter pounder was massive to me. Like, it blew my mind that, oh, this bass is bigger than my hand, and I'm 9 years old. Of course it's bigger than my hand. But, you know, I grew up fishing that, and that's all we had access to try and catch. And like Jesse mentioned, we had, him and I both had a collection. I still have a collection of the old scientific angler books that we'd read. They were outdated at the time.
They're very outdated now.
They're very outdated now. But, you know, like he says, looking at that, and I'm looking at these baits, and it's like, yeah, I grew up dunking worms or, you know, casting a Rapala, and that was it. And once I started reading these books, and it was like, this is cool. We can use like plastic baits. They work. You can have like a frog lure. What is that? And trying to use those and actually getting success, like similar to Jesse's experience, that blew my mind that fishing is not just something that's just chance. You can learn to be better at it. And the more knowledge and skills that you can grow in it, you can see like huge results come from that without really a whole lot of effort.
For sure. And I think another thing that I kind of fell in love with Andrew, we'll get into this a little later, but pike fishing. I think that's the thing that we bonded over the most when we started fishing together, like almost 17, 18 years ago.
Yeah, when I was 12 or 13, we did a lot of pike fishing.
In a canoe. Pike fishing in a canoe. We would paddle for hours and catch 25 to 30 inch northerns on Mep spinners, pretty much. That
canoe, I still have that. We've had some content in that on our YouTube account. And that canoe I bought, I think I was 14 years old when I bought that, specifically for a portage into Algonquin Park. It's an old Swift canoe. And I bought it brand new. I'd saved up for literally years. And I said, this is my purchase I'm going to do with this. So that got us actually on the water. And you know, fishing more than just from shore, which has very limited access.
And we've only flipped it once.
Well, you have. I've flipped it a few times.
Okay, me and Andrew together have only flipped it once, and it was because of a 20+ pound salmon that was, you know, porpoising right beside our boat with, you know, we were trying to grab it, and, you know, we tipped it in the lake Ontario.
The good thing is Jesse saved the salmon, so all the important bits were good.
Yeah,
I think we lost we lost a phone. We saved all the gear. Yeah. We had a buddy who was out there in the area too, and he in his kayak, and he came over. He's like, "Is everything all right?" And Jesse's handing him all his expensive rods, and I'm using a piece of junk. So I'm like, "Leave mine." It's fine.
But at the same time, I'm holding onto the Chinook, and it's got a J13 hanging in its mouth, swimming between our legs as we're trying to
the canoe is full of water, and it's like half
in the nutsack. With a J13 Rapala. So we handed the fish to the guy in the kayak, and he pulled it out of the way, so we were safe. And then we survived. So here's the next question. Warren from Yak and Bassin, one of my favorite Ontario accounts, if you don't follow him. I had the pleasure of fishing with him once at the kayak tournament last September, but this guy can skip a jig like no one's business. Like, you see those videos on YouTube where the guy skips a jig and it's just like gliding across the water? That's literally Warren, and I have no idea how he does it. I don't know how he does it. I'm pretty sure it's some kind of weird sorcery, but I'm not going to ask him about that. But he asked us this question: at what age did you guys meet each other? So me and Andrew's relationship is a bit weird. So me and Andrew, Andrew used to live down by Lake Ontario, until what? You were 12?
7.
7. Okay.
Yeah.
So my family knew his family. Long story short, they moved away when he was 7. I was like, what, 9?
Yeah.
And I was just like, whatever. Doesn't matter to me if I never see those guys again, whatever.
We didn't really,
Well,
we
we
knew of
were
each other,
young.
but we weren't friends.
No,
at
we
the
weren't
time.
friends.
We were
We were
not
young.
friends at all.
So anyway, a few years passed. He moves up near Lake Simcoe, and my mom, I think I was like 12.
Yeah, it's a few years. So yeah, you
12.
were 12. I was about 10.
And she's like, "Oh, you're gonna go up and have a play date with Andrew and his brother." And I was like, "No, I don't want to go. They're nerds and all this stuff." So she forced me to go. And I think the first trip, I didn't really like. I wasn't really. I didn't.
We tolerated each other, but we didn't really get along.
Yeah.
So we played some GameCube but Jesse's not a big gamer.
Neither
Neither were we really. And it's like, what are we gonna do? But the second time you came up, we decided, like, you're like, Lake Simcoe's right there. Why don't we go fishing? So you brought a rod the next time.
Yeah.
We rode our bikes down to the lake, and that's when we went fishing together for the first time.
And then I think the next year you brought me up to your guys' cottage.
Yeah,
and then
the
after
third
that, every year for like 5 or 6 years in a row,
About
probably
6 years in a row.
we went fishing up at his cottage for pike, and we really just became obsessed fishing buddies at that point. Now, the interesting part of me and Andrew's relationship is back when we were fishing together, I remember him saying, "Oh, I wish we were brothers." And I said, "Well, you got any cousins? I'll marry one of them, then we'll be related." Literally, I'm going to say 15 years later. No, 10 years later, something like that. I actually ended up marrying one of Andrew's cousins. So we are technically related.
That's right.
So.
Jesse married my cousin, and I married someone he didn't even know.
Yeah, weird. He didn't marry my sister. Like, what the heck? Anyway,
Can
so
you blame me?
that's how long we've been fishing together. I always know, like, a lot of people are like, "Wow, you guys have been fishing together for forever. You must have a lot of stories." And believe me, we do. And we're going to talk about a lot of them in our podcast coming up.
We won't be able to hold ourselves back from sprinkling them in whenever they fit or whenever we can make them fit.
And hopefully they'll be slightly entertaining. Like, I know a lot of people tell me fishing stories and they're completely boring. And you're like, okay, I hear it. But, like, we've had some actually whacked situations happen to us, like weird stuff, or just like stuff you wouldn't believe is true. I mean, we fish Oshawa a lot, so that should tell you something. All right, here's another question from Can Cast Fishing. I'm pretty sure that's Kyle. It says, "Will you ever get out of small craft angling into a bigger boat?" What about you, Andrew?
Probably not. Don't get me wrong. I would love to get the opportunity to fish with someone on their boat. Like, hands down, I'd love to get that experience, at a Pro-Am, tournament or something like that. That would be amazing. But right now, the amount of financial benefits that I would need to get before I could even consider getting a larger boat would be insane. Like, we just upgraded to the Tinner, which for me is a big boat, something I can stand up in, no concerns.
Well, we've been fishing out of a canoe for years. Like 15 plus years.
The cottage
Kayaks
was
and
great
canoes.
because we did have it was a 12-foot aluminum at the cottage. So that was where we did most of our fishing from a boat.
But we didn't even have a motor to put on it.
Yeah. So most of the time, we'd still paddle around canoes and troll.
Yep.
But it was...
Same with me, though. Like, honestly, like, I don't want to sound like a typical millennial, but, like, I can't afford a big boat. I can't. Like, living in this area, it's very expensive. Like, I'm very happy fishing out of our small crafts in a lot of the lakes that bigger boats can't even get into. Like, like, of course I'd love to go out, like, on some big water and stuff like that, but there's so much opportunities for, like, lakes that a lot of, like, there's one lake that me and Andrew fish. I'm not going to mention it, but there's no way anyone would ever launch. There is a launch there, but no one ever launches boats in there, like bigger boats, because it's full of stumps. Like, it's full of stumps and rocks, and like there's no way.
We've gone by there and we've seen unfortunate signs that, like, the bottom half of a motor, just in the bottom of the lake,
and
they're gonna hit stuff, and
we've
people
gone
don't
there
know the
several
area.
times. And how many times have you seen a actual boat that's not a little Tinner in there?
Yeah,
Never. Okay.
No.
And guess what?
All the locals that even live on the lake,
It's all Tinners.
they all got either jet skis, like jet propulsion, shallow running, or Tinners. That's it. Like, you can't get a large boat on the lake.
And how many days have you had a phenomenal day fishing that lake?
Pretty much every single one.
Every single time you're fishing and you're like, wow, 4-pound largemouth, 3-pound smallmouth, like, and no one fishes it. That's the thing. That's, if you have a kayak or a canoe or a small craft like a Tinner with a, a 9.9 or a 20, you can fish so many lakes. Like, yeah, it does limit where you can fish. Like, yeah, you can't fish like on Lake Simcoe with a 12-foot tenor if you're smart.
You eliminate a lot of big water by not having a large boat. But on that flip side, there's a lot of small water that you can't fish or can't access or can't launch with a larger boat, and that I find way more appealing. Like, I love being the only guy on a small lake paddling a canoe or kayak around or something, and that is the most relaxing day I could have, rather than going to, a bigger Kawartha Lake or going to like Lake Simcoe or Lake Ontario even, or whatever, and you're fishing these areas and you've got 17 other boats around you. It's not as relaxing, and fishing is great, but we also love the aspect where we appreciate the relaxation that comes along with it.
Exactly. Like, yeah, sure, you can sit on Simcoe where they're catching the 5 and 6 pound smallies, but there's 30 boats around you. Like, I get it. I would do it myself if I had a bigger boat, but like
I said, if we got invited out to go, hey, you want to catch those 5-pound smallies on my boat? Sure.
By the way, if you have a bass boat and you'd like to take out us, we will 100% go and pay for some of the gas. All right, let's get to another question. We get a lot of questions from people that are like, hey, let's get out fishing. Let's go fishing. And I'm always like, yeah, let's do it. And honestly, we never do it because it just never works out. But if you do have a bass boat, please let us know and we'll go. Here's another question. And these are just questions to help you learn a little bit about us.
Yeah, because the whole point with this podcast, like, this is kind of our episode 0, our pilot. So this isn't exactly following the same outline that our future ones are going to. They're going to be slightly more structured in the sense of there's going to be a designated topic we're going to be discussing. Right now, we wanted to talk about kind of what to expect from the podcast, kind of who we are, kind of a new introduction to ourselves, in case this is your first time you're hearing of us and you haven't seen us on Instagram or our YouTube content. We want you to get to know, kind of get a feel for who Jesse and I are, what we like to do for fishing, kind of where we're coming from with our knowledge, with our background, our experience, because we want this podcast to appeal to people who are avid fishermen, like us. If someone professional wants to listen to it, that'd be amazing. But even people who have never fished before. I have friends where they didn't grow up with a parent who would take them fishing, and so they've never been, but they might want to. You might want to. So we're going to have some episodes even focused on, how to get started into fishing. What's some of the first techniques you want to learn? What's some of the, the first things you're going to buy to get into it? Where can you go when you first start? Kind of some rules of thumb. And we don't give out locations. We don't tell you do this time of day exactly here you're going to catch fish. We never got that ourselves, and we want to make sure that we can give you kind of the tools so that you can learn wherever you are in your local area how to catch fish. And that's our goal.
Beneficial to learn how to find spots to catch fish instead of getting people telling you where there's spots. Like, of course, it's nice when people tell you spots, but if you can learn how to find places that hold fish at certain times of the year, then you can go to any lake and find fish, hopefully. But anyway, here's the next question. This is from Colin, and his question is, what is your favorite species to target, and from which region in Ontario do you like fishing the most? So I'd say, like, I like fishing up near Algonquin. I like that, but like, we mostly fish in zone 17 and 15, mostly for like bass, muskie, that kind of stuff. We do fish like salmon and steelhead, but I'd say my favorite species to target, like, it's hard because when you live in Ontario, there's so many good things to fish, and it changes every year. Like, some years I'm like, oh man, steelhead fishing this year is phenomenal. I just love steelhead fishing.
And there are some guys out there where they are steelhead fishermen and they will fish for steelhead every single day year round. Like, they are steelhead fishermen. They will only ever fish for steelhead.
And there's bass guys that
totally
do that
fine.
too.
There's bass guys that only fish for bass. There's guys that only like ice fishing. But for Jesse and I, like, we have such a love of fishing in general. We are multi-species. Like,
yeah,
we kind of judge it by the season too as to what's going to be best for us to go for. Like, so we're not going for salmon. Right now we don't have a big boat, so we can't access them. But in the fall, yeah, we'll target some salmon when they come into the pre-spawn and start staging and whatnot.
Yeah, and like, I always tell people, like, there's only so much time every year. Like, you have to decide what you want to do. Like, for instance, like, hey, like, I know guys like chucking spoons off the pier in August for salmon, the early ones. and there's not a lot of salmon at that time. You can catch them, yeah, but I'd rather be doing other things in August that's better. Like, I'd rather go muskie fishing than possibly catch a salmon off the pier, because I have all of September and October to do that. So like, you really have to decide every month of the year what you want to target. Like, some years, like I know last year we did a lot of muskie fishing and we didn't do any salmon fishing. We didn't go salmon fishing once, but we went muskie fishing and we caught muskie and we had success, and it was a grind. Like, yeah, we actually put in the time and went muskie fishing and it paid off. We both caught some muskie. It was a good fall for us. And you know what? We might do that again this fall, or we might fish for salmon. We'll see what happens.
But we'll go back around to that, answer that question properly though. So what's your favorite species then, Jesse? If you had to choose one.
The one that I'm obsessed with lately, not really obsessed with, like, I'd say muskie fishing. Like, I feel like in fishing, there's different stages of what you go through. Like, at first, you just want to catch anything. Then the next stage is you want to catch as many fish as possible. And then there's a stage where you want to catch big fish. And then there's a stage where you want to catch trophy fish. Like, I'm not there, but I want to catch muskie. Like, to me, it's the challenge. Like, if I want to catch big fish, it's easier to catch many other fish than muskie for size. Like, you know, like, there's guys that go carp fishing, there's guys that just fish for salmon, but like, muskie fishing, to me, it's the challenge, because like, they're not hard fish to catch, but they're so far out and moody that it's such a challenge to catch them.
The knowledge you need to locate them and to initiate that strike, that's the challenge of them, not so much their quantity.
And they're not the best fighting fish. Like, yeah, you hook them, they're in the net in like 20 seconds, but to get to that point, it takes so much effort. And when it finally happens and you get that muskie in the net and your heart's just pounding, for me, there's no better feeling like when you have a big muskie in the net.
And you show that picture of you holding that muskie to anyone, that's an impressive photo.
Yeah.
People who aren't fishermen get impressed with a photo like that. So that's always fun part of it too.
It gets to the point where like, you have to decide, do you want to just have fun, or do you want to challenge yourself and learn new things? And like, you know, like when we were in our early 20s, and like when we were teenagers in our early 20s, like, yeah, we'd go, oh, let's go frog fishing for bass. But it's like,
and we still
do it so many years, and it's like, yeah, I love frog fishing. But then you're like, you know what? Let's try to catch a muskie in a topwater.
Yeah.
And you might not catch a fish for 3 days straight, and then boom, you smoke a big one, and it's all worth it. Yeah. So I'd have to say muskie. That's a very long explanation for a one-word answer.
We got into muskie recently, but I love it too. I'm really getting into it. But I'd have to say I came into largemouth bass fishing a bit later than Jesse did. I'm still a big bass guy. I love it. I love crankbait fishing, especially for smallies, and frog fishing, like topwater. I do like more of a finesse approach in general. I know Jesse's more of a power fishing guy. I really like using kind of wacky topwaters and getting results with that. I don't know, something about, you know, using a spider lure or a dragonfly on the top of the water, or you know, oddly hooking a fluke through the side and just kind of dragging it through the weeds. Like, that kind of stuff is what I love. Those long pauses, that subtle approach. And for me, I get the most reaction with that when I'm going bass fishing. So I would have to say, if I had to choose between smallmouth and largemouth, I'd probably say smallmouth, just because I really like fishing for me, it's really about the whole experience. If I'm fishing a really dark lake, like really tannic water, lots of rocks, sparse weeds, and I can just cast a crankbait all day and catch some smallmouth, that is amazing. Yeah, I love a smallmouth day.
So, and that's another good thing I think with this podcast, because me and Andrew are very different, like how we fish. Like, I grew up fishing, well, trout, but like for bass, let's say, we'll use bass as an example. I grew up fishing slop, lily pads, stumps, docks, like thick stuff. I'm using literally an extra heavy punching rod and a 1 ounce tungsten weight, and I'm punching through slop mats and cheese mats. Andrew, on the other hand, he has these little finesse BFS baits, and he's chucking them near little rocks and lakes that don't have any weeds. So like, we force each other to learn. Like, I taught Andrew, or I basically forced Andrew to go frog fishing and to punch.
That's about 6-7 years ago. It was my first fish ever on a frog,
and it was insane. Like we're fishing literally the sloppiest Kawartha Lake that I know. And I'm just like, just cast. And he's like, how are the fish going to come up? I'm like, they'll come up, believe me. And boom, he smoked a fish. Like, it was I think it was like a 3-pounder. His first bass on a frog was like a 3-pound largie. Yeah. Came up. And after that, we were like, oh, let's do something else. He's like, nope, all day. We just fished frogs. And we had a good day. I think we caught like 7 or 8 that day. Yeah. It was pretty good.
I actually did really well on the frogs
and
that day.
And was in a canoe.
You did really good on the jig that same day. But I was too stubborn to switch to jigs. I was hooked on the frog that day.
I love Texas rigs and jigs. Like I could jig fish all day. I like flipping into like, pockets around docks, and you just hear that boom, fish grabs it, and you're just bing! You hear that the braid make that noise. It's like bing! I love that. But here's the thing. That is cool, but not all lakes that you can fish have that.
No.
So it's really good to do different things. And Andrew forces me to finesse fish. I force him to power fish. Like, this guy never had braid on his rod for years. He'd be frog fishing with 14-pound mono. And I'm just like, what are you doing?
10-pound mono. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And I'm like, you got to put some 50-pound braid on that rod. And he's like, oh, okay.
So just a question then, locally. So let's do what's kind of a dream fish that you would want to catch. Let's say like anywhere in the world, and then versus something we actually could have access to, where you just need to kind of know what to do. Maybe you've caught them before, but what's something you want to learn how to do better locally?
One thing that I want to learn how to do better is locate bigger smallmouth bass on weedy lakes, like finding those rock weed or sand transitions. Like we found this lake, me and Andrew fish. It's a weedy lake, and we found this really big rock pile just randomly in the middle. And we fished the lake before, and we never found the place. We marked it on our GPS. So every time we go back to that lake, we go there, and every single time we'll pull a bunch of big bass out of that spot. Like not huge ones.
That is a consistent spot. If we want to catch something that day, we go there. We'll each catch a couple.
And it's literally like a huge weed bed, and it's like someone dumped a transport truck of rocks, just like spread out in this. And you'd never see it unless you drove right over it. It's a small little spot, and there's always big smallmouth. There's some pike in there. Yeah. There's big largemouth in there. Like, I want to find more spots like that, because like guys that I'm actually really impressed with are those guys that can pull out the big limits of smallies from weedy lakes.
For sure. I think for me locally, I like walleye is one for sure. I think this year we're going to be trying a bit more. I never had the experience. I never grew up with a dad who could also walleye fish or anything like that, so I don't really know how to target
Make it sound like it's a
them.
disability. I grew up
Please
with a dad.
Donate now.
Can'twalleyefish.org. Your dad's listening to this like, come on, I taught you piano.
That's a useful skill.
Yeah.
So to have, I think walleye is one for sure, but I'd say my top would be crappie. Like we found this pond actually we call it Little Okeechobee, and it just has crappie and largemouth in it.
Literally, no sunfish, nothing.
It like not huge crappie. The biggest one's maybe 10 inches. Like the biggest.
Yeah, they're decent size.
They're not bad.
They're not.
But
they're
not
slabs,
right?
Yeah.
But I am so excited. You actually see we have a video on that still on YouTube, I think, of fishing that pond for early spring crappie, I think it's called.
Yep.
And they're not huge, but it was so much fun. And I watched a bunch of videos. Like, I really want this spring, I'm hoping. I really want to get out, and that's something I want to learn, is how to target effectively and locate crappie, because that's been one of my dream fish for years.
I think crappie are one of those fish that they stump a lot of people, and 100% that's us. Not, you know what though, we've never actually full out targeted them, because a lot of the lakes around us are either, I mean, there's crappie in them, but like some of the lakes that have good populations of crappie, they get pretty crowded around that time of year.
Yeah,
like Rice Lake, I know gets slammed pretty hard.
And I know Simcoe had and especially in years past, there's, some good crappie population there. But again, not having a boat that we could effectively put on that lake 99% of the time without getting tipped over.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
No canoes on Lake Simcoe.
Yeah. I mean, I've done it. That's also where I flipped 3 of the times where I flipped a canoe.
He's still alive to this day.
But yeah,
I think,
what I would say.
Just to add one dream fish I would love to catch, and I think any angler would want to do, is a bigger than 40-inch tiger muskie.
That's for sure.
And we fish a lot of lakes that have like tiger muskie, and a lot of the Kawartha lakes are lakes that have a high percentage chance of catching a tiger, and I've never caught a tiger.
For those that don't know what a tiger muskie is, they are a crossbreed between a northern pike and a muskie. And they get like this really weird, like
beautiful fish,
like leopard. Like if you've seen a picture of a spotted muskie, but then you put in like some darker color patterns over the top of that, and it just looks like a leopard. Like it's amazing.
They're
gorgeous fish.
Yeah.
When you cross the pike and muskie, it's like the pinnacle
something
of
magical
Essex
happens.
fishing.
Yeah, and they're just I think it's a bucket list fish for a lot of anglers. And you know what? They're fairly common to catch in Ontario. Like, it's not like it's something crazy. Like, like for instance, like Balsam Lake is really known for having a big population of tiger muskie. Rice Lake, really any lake that has pike and muskie in it is going to have it. There's a lot of questions that were asked on an Instagram poll, and they're more in depth, and we're going to cover those actually in actual episodes, such as like, choosing a float for float fishing, like what size of float would you pick, different topics like that. We don't want this intro to be like 4 hours long, so
I just wanted to mention then before wrapping up here, so our next episode that we release, we're hoping to release around the beginning of March or the end of February is going to be our first actual episode release on the topic of small craft angling, something that we've had a lot of interest in over the years from our viewers. And so we're going to do a full episode on kind of kayak and canoe fishing. In the future, we will do an episode as well on like small aluminum craft fishing. But right now, we're going to focus this one on just kayaks and canoes. A bit of knowledge about what we've done to them, how we've modified them, what we recommend, and go from there. We're going to do another episode later on about monofilament versus fluorocarbon and braid, kind of what's the benefits to those, when you'd want to use those different types of line material, depending on species or lure, what action, whatever you want to do. We're going to do kind of a deep dive on the difference between those lines.
And it sounds boring, but Andrew's telling me a little bit of this research. He does a lot of research on this. It's actually very interesting because I think fluorocarbon is one of those topics. I know a lot of people are like, fluorocarbon's a scam, and other people are like, you need to use fluorocarbon. So it's interesting. If you're maybe wondering like, it's expensive, is it worth the money? We'll tell you, and we'll tell you when it's worth it and when it's not worth it.
Yeah, and like I said, like Jesse said, I like to do some research, so I'm hoping on a lot of these topics, especially that line topic, is what is the real difference between them, so that it's just giving you the facts, and then you'll hear our opinion for sure, but we want you to be able to make up your own mind about what you want to do, because fishing is something that it's best when you can decide, hey, I want to go out here, catch this myself. And that's the goal of this podcast, is to help you do that more effectively, or just to listen to two kooks talk about their enjoyment of the exact same topic.
So our podcast is going to be very real. Like Andrew said, you're going to be able to make up your own decision, because fishing is different for everyone. Like someone like, for instance, me, I like using fluorocarbon for some things, and other people like, I don't think it matters. I don't think the bass can see, like, they don't care.
I use braid for most of my applications.
Yeah. So it depends per person. So it's going to be an interesting topic. And I thought we could just quickly go through like what you can expect to hear in the next year. So like, I don't know if you're going to talk about like, it's going to be a weekly podcast.
Yes.
Which, as you can tell by now, we've been talking a lot. We have a lot of topics to cover, and doing a weekly podcast, it won't be difficult for me and Andrew because we like to talk.
We just, was it yesterday we were talking on the phone about
the podcast.
About the podcast and about random things, and we were talking for an hour and a half just because
my phone was at 3%. I was like, well, time to go.
We can talk your ear off. So we're going to do our best to keep the podcast in around between 45 minutes to an hour. We want to be under an hour on the podcast for sure, because we want you to be able to listen to it on your commute to and from work. You got a podcast done. Mm-hmm. So we want it to be kind of a nice bite-sized format, once a week, like Jesse said. Yep. And anything else that you wanted to?
I just want to add what you can expect for us throughout the year. So like, as we mentioned, I don't really like the term multi-species angler. Like, I get it. Like, it also seems kind of cheesy. Like, I'm a multi-species angler. You know what I mean?
We're not saying that as a brag.
No, because that's the thing. Say you live in Texas, you're going to fish for bass, right? They don't have muskie. They don't have pike. We have everything here in Ontario. So like, this podcast, we are going to be able to talk about all the things that we fish for personally. So like, you start in the year, like, we're not huge ice fishing guys, but we're going to do some ice fishing. Okay. Then after ice out, what's the first thing we do?
Pike.
We do early season pike fishing. And around the same time, steelhead fishing, right? Then you get into May, carp fishing.
More pike. No.
more pike for sure, when pike season actually opens in a lot of the zones. But then May, you've got pre-spawn carp. You have walleye fishing that opens up. Then June, boom, you have muskie season. You have bass season.
Bass opens up,
And then pretty much throughout the summer, unless it's too hot, we're going to be fishing for muskie, bass, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And then August, salmon start coming in.
You also get the walleye coming in the fall as well. So August, September, October, you're getting walleye. Even then, you're getting late season bass where they start to like pack on the weight. They're changing where they are.
Yep.
We were doing pretty good last year at trying to locate where bass go in the fall because, just for our own experience.
And it's a good time to learn how to catch probably one of the bigger bass you'll ever catch is in the fall. A lot of those smallie guys know that. They're catching, 7-pound smallmouth in the fall now in Simcoe. Yeah, to wrap it up, like Andrew said, it's going to be a weekly podcast, which is going to be good. It's going to be available on...
It's going to be on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts. And this one right now has not been recorded for video, but we will be doing a video recording of our podcast as well. So if you want to take a look at our ugly mugs while we're talking, you can check that out on YouTube. And we're going to have that edited and fully ready to go for our first podcast.
Yeah, and the YouTube videos, there may be a little bit of extra stuff you'll see if we're holding something, but generally speaking, it's going to be more focused on being a podcast. So there's not going to be, a lot of stuff you're going to miss if you listen to it on Spotify or on a streaming service. So anyway, thanks for listening. If you've got this far, we will be posting another story on our Instagram in the next few weeks for questions and for the question and answer section on our first actual podcast. And the reason you should send us a question is because we're going to have a really cool giveaway, and the winner will be someone who asks a question, and all the names are going to go into one of Andrew's sweaty hats. Gross. Anyway, we will see you guys soon.